This question will begin with Mr. Causey, and this is our third question. We'll continue the sequence as we've been going. Washington is gridlocked, and the result is an ever-increasing debt and expansion of government through regulation and bureaucracy. What will you do to change that as one of 435, and what example can you offer of similar accomplishment to date? Mr. Causey?
Thank you. That's exactly right. We have gridlock in Washington. They're not getting the job done. It's been talked about repeatedly. And the biggest problem is the overreach of the federal government and the massive overspending that we talked about with the $17.3 trillion debt, which none of us can understand, but we can understand $54,000 per person is what we owe. And I've had experience in government for a long time. I worked for 12 years at the North Carolina General Assembly as, I won't use that word that nobody likes, but I represented as a consumer advocate and a representative for small business. I represented the small body shop owners in North Carolina, represented the alternative health care practitioners and the little guys against the big insurance companies normally. And I, as a registered government relations person in North Carolina, I was able to work with both sides of the aisle and get legislation passed that benefited the people of North Carolina. I believe I could do the same thing in Washington. As I said, I grew up in a staunch Democrat family. I've always been a registered Republican, but I've had the ability to work with both sides of the aisle to come together for some common ground, and that's what we need in Washington. We need people to stand up and have some backbone and stand up for their constituents, but at the same time be able to work across the aisle and find some common ground to get things done. Thank you.
Thank you. Be wary of those who continue to sign pieces and deals from those that are special interest groups from Washington, D.C. and Raleigh. You know, one example is it's floating around is Grover Norquist tax pledge. See, that is part of the Washington gridlock. Congress have been signing those pledges since 1986. And as the afternoon talk show Dr. Phil says, how's that working for you? You know, Zach and I may disagree on some of the issues, but one of the things that I concur with him on is it's not about making deals with lobbyists, groups of people, even some that maybe have good causes. You need people that make pledges and promises to the people of the 6th District. That's crucial. One of the things that Washington is facing is the kingdom building when you get up there with representatives, albeit Congress, the representatives or the senators, all of Congress, all 535. People get up there and they said, you know, it's time to build a kingdom. It's time to get my brother-in-law working here for $250,000, and we got this lobbyist group. It's a mess. We've been up there multiple times. It's broken. It's a land of work 2 or 3 hours a day and have a $90 lunch. You and I don't relate to that very much, do we? And it is time, past time, to get up there and make changes. And I believe one of the most important ways to do that is term limits. Now, I don't think for a second that most of those guys are going to sign off of it, but here's what I think you hope to look for in a representative. Find somebody who will self-impose those term limits. That's the pledge that I've made, to impose term limits and not go up there and build a kingdom. Thank you.
Gridlock exists in Washington. I'm up there a lot and I see it firsthand. The first and prime responsibility for Congress should be getting our economy moving and creating jobs, not issuing regulations. This is one example. Sarbanes-Oxley, and compliance with that regulation costs our businesses a one-time cost of $6.5 billion, and it costs our economy $5.3 billion every year thereafter. These kind of regulations are what's dragging our economy down. It reminds me of Ronald Reagan when he said, if the answer is more government and more spending, then it's a pretty stupid question. And that's what I feel. When I go to Congress, I'm going to do whatever I can to create more jobs, not just reduce regulation. Regulation is nothing more than a symptom of the disease. We need to reinvigorate the free market economy, and by doing that, you have to lower taxes. And you have to lower taxes, reduce the regulations, of course, but you have to have a reevaluation of our entire regulatory system, which in my opinion also includes, I go to Congress, I'm going to be pushing for the dismantling of certain agencies, such as Department of Education, Agriculture, Transportation, and not just to do away with them, but return them to their rightful place, and that's within the states, so North Carolina can govern their own future. I believe North Carolina can do more with that money and with our interests here than what the federal government would ever desire to do. They don't really care about us. As Mark said, they're in it for the power, and that's all it is. We need to return it back to the states. I am very much a states' rights 10th Amendment individual. Thank you.
Folks, as I said earlier, we've got a leadership problem in Washington, D.C., and it's in both parties. We've got Harry Reid recently said that his primary job was to defend the federal government. That's ludicrous, folks. The primary mission of Congress is to preserve and protect our American way of life. That doesn't mean create jobs. That's what free enterprise is for. Less regulations and less taxes, certainty in the marketplace will allow the expansion of our economy, not by having QE 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. You know, the gridlock exists because Republican leadership is agreeing with the Democrat Party on what to do next. I'm going to go up there and stand with true patriots like Ted Cruz, and Republicans are not standing with him. When he stood in the Senate for 21 hours and talked about what Obamacare would do if implemented, who criticized him the most? The Republican Party, members of his own party. Guess what? Just like Congressman Joe Wilson from South Carolina that stood up, didn't stand up, he spoke up during a State of the Union a few years ago and said to the president, "You lied." He was right. So was Ted Cruz. We need people to go up there and stand on principle, not increase the debt limit. I will not vote to increase the debt limit. John Boehner, his excuse right now is that, well, gee, I only control and represent 1/2 of 1/3 of the government. Well, that's a factually true statement, but he's self-imposing a limitation on himself that he doesn't need to do. The House is the one that is authorizing funding for every element of our government. They don't need to spend more money than we take in, and we don't need to increase the debt limit.
When I say I won't compromise on our conservative values, I mean it, period. And I have a history of standing up for conservative values. I have a history of working with people who may disagree with me. As president of the Conference of District Attorneys for the state of North Carolina, I work with a number of Democrats across this state, and we work on legislation. Let me just tell you 2 measures that we were able to get almost every Democrat to agree with. First was the repeal of the Racial Justice Act. Democrats in highly Democratic areas, Democrat DAs in highly Democrat areas were able to convince themselves, convince their constituents that it was the right thing to do because that was the right thing for justice. Also, we were able to help pass House Bill 937. House Bill 937, how many of you have a concealed weapons permit? Oh, come on, they're more than that. Yeah. All right, if you're able to carry your weapon into a bar, restaurant, park now, right, put it in your glove box when you take your kids to school or grandkids to school, that's because we helped pass that bill. Now, it was a reasonable measure that should have been passed anyway, but we were able to put some pressure on the legislators to do that. So one of the things that will enable us to do, enable my team to do, is work with people all across the aisle who are interested in conservative values. And that's why I'm excited about being one of the 10 Republicans who goes to Washington from North Carolina. We have a force multiplier that can take conservative values to a completely different level. Because we have individuals like Mark Meadows, Virginia Foxx, Patrick McHenry, individuals who are true conservatives who are waiting for one of us to get there with uncompromising conservative values. Thank you.
This is a great question for numerous reasons. Going back to Obamacare too, and sticking with this one, is as Republicans we got to be better. We got to roll up our sleeves more. We actually got to bring ideas instead of getting steamrolled, because we haven't done it the last few years. The increasing debt. How about cut spending? How about ideas to cut spending? And we're not giving the ideas. Here's an idea. If a job, this is what I did in Greensboro, if a job was posted and funded for over 6 months, but not fulfilled, eliminate it. You don't need it. We cut $1 million, right like that. Think about doing that in the federal government. If a job is posted and funded and it's not fulfilled in 6 months, cut it, eliminate it. Regulation and bureaucracy, Newt Gingrich once did this, and I would support it totally. Think about sunsetting legislation. Sunset it. Don't just let it live on forever. Sunset it. Make Congress work and pass the legislation that's necessary. Sunset some. Accomplishments, 2008. Despite tremendously bad times economically, I voted to balance the budget, despite a $10+ million deficit. 2009, same thing. I voted to balance the budget. 2010, despite very difficult economic times, we decreased taxes in the city of Greensboro. 2011, 12, 13, despite $8+ million deficits, we just cut spending and made government efficient. You can't just shut government down. You got to make it efficient. And by the way, there hasn't been a Republican majority in the city of Greensboro in I don't know how long. So you can get things done the way that you want to get it done, and you can get it done bipartisan, but your way as a Republican and cutting taxes. You can do it. We can do it in Washington just like we've done it in Greensboro.
I'll just talk briefly about the debt and then maybe about the regulations. Our debt to GDP ratio is closing in on 100%. Debt to GDP ratio. I don't know if any of you have read a book by economists Reinhardt and Rogoff, It's Different This Time, which talks about the dangers of an economy when the debt to GDP ratio reaches 100%. That's going to happen to the U.S. very soon. And once we go above that, we're starting to get into the territory of Greece, Italy, and Japan. Japan's debt to GDP is something like 200%. The reason for this is simple. If you look 2 years ago, our deficit that year was 56% above our revenues. And the deficit that year, the loopholes that were given in this country were 83% of the deficit. So we have to close down loopholes. I think many of you know I'm a proponent of a flat tax. I think a flat tax is apolitical. It doesn't discriminate against you because of the party that you belong to. Let me just quickly talk about regulations. If you've recently looked at the World Bank report on ease of setting up business, the United States ranks 34th in the world in construction permit efficiency when a company wants to invest. We've lost 300,000 jobs here in North Carolina. I'm not saying we're responsible for the 34th ranking, but that's a problem for this country. We ranked 64th in paying taxes. That is abominable. We have to lower taxes in order to attract business. We have to eliminate regulations. Thank you.